If your childhood was anything like mine, you were practically raised by Disney. And just like the children of today are brought up in front of iPads and on-demand personality type tailored children's series, our generation was brought up in front of the television. It therefore should not surprise us that a lot of our early understanding of good and evil and morality in general was formed by the messages that we absorbed while we watched these movies. But of course, as long as these movies taught us to fight for what we believe in, take responsibility, dare to dream and be ourselves, etc., then I guess there's nothing wrong about that. And yet, watching some of the latest movies by Disney, it's clear that something has changed, and not for the better. And no, I'm not only talking about the blue fairy in Disney's remake of Pinocchio now being black and for some weird reason bald. I'm not talking about the fact that all animals in the Disney live-action remakes are now just a bunch of completely soulless computer-generated images with lines read up by actors who clearly want to be somewhere else. No, I'm talking about something much more profound. A change that has happened to some of the deep messages and moral lessons sewn into the fabric of these stories. In this video, focusing particularly on some of the Disney live-action remakes, I will present you with 3 subtle but extremely important changes that have happened to these stories, which completely changes the moral message presented to whoever watches it. And as we move forward, I will show you why these changes have deep morally philosophical implications for whatever impressionable mind, child or adult, watches it, and how this new generation of Disney is breeding a weak society. However, before we get to any of that, of course, please remember to subscribe to my channel. Currently, as I'm filming this, I have 497 subscribers, and hopefully when you watch this, I will have crossed 500. But I really do hope that you find these topics enlightening and important. Also, I just want to mention that in this video, I will not be focusing very much on how well the different Disney movies are doing. I might mention it briefly, but it doesn't have any real relevance for the point I'm making. Now, there are a bunch of other videos out there. Some of them are really good, that sort of go over some of the more technical details with regards to animation and why Disney might be failing on some of those aspects. But I will, in this video, as mentioned earlier, be focusing instead on some of the profound changes that have happened to the messages and narratives of these movies. So let's get started. Among all the Disney movies, there's hardly any that deals more with the archetypical message of taking responsibility than The Lion King. And at the same time, there's also hardly any movie better suited for a Jungian interpretation, which makes it quite straightforward to analyze. I mean, look at the different characters. Simba, of course, as the hero archetype undergoing a hero's journey. Mufasa as the father archetype or the wise old man. And of course, Rafiki, helping Simba build a bridge between himself and some of the other archetypes. Most importantly, his shadow. I mean, you can almost think that this movie was designed around a Jungian framework. And because these symbols stand out so clearly in the movie, it also appears very clearly when something fundamental is suddenly changed. Now, there are several details in the movie that confirms my point, but one scene in particular illustrates it very clearly. So let's move directly to that one. Of course, you've probably already seen the movie, so there's no real reason to do a full recap of the story. But just to make sure we're on the same page, Simba, of course, as a child having been confronted with a darkness greater than he can manage or even comprehend, has attempted to escape his past and has lived out his childhood in the jungle of nihilism, the jungle of purposelessness. And the scene I'm referring to is the one where Rafiki, the old baboon, helps Simba reach out to his father. Let's try to take a look at and deconstruct the scene from the old version.
Simba, you have forgotten me.
No. How could I?
You have forgotten who you are, and so forgotten me.
Notice what Mufasa is saying at first. You've forgotten me, you've forgotten yourself, and therefore you've forgotten me. So this is of course Mufasa, the father archetype, obviously confronting Simba with his choice to leave behind both his past and his responsibility, and refuse to face his own shadow.
No. How could I?
You have forgotten who you are, and so forgotten me.
Now notice that even though Simba refuses to accept that statement, Mufasa just keeps talking. There's no negotiation, there's no discussion.
Look inside yourself, Simba. You are more than what you have become.
You are more than what you've become. If you think about it, this is an interesting statement. And what Mufasa is doing is that he's confronting Simba with the fact that Simba is now essentially just a fraction of his own self. This is referring to Simba not having gone through what Jung called individuation, where one integrates the different parts or components of the psyche and then becomes a whole individual. In other words, Simba has left behind a part of himself and he refuses to face his own darkness. Therefore, he has grown up physically, but his identity is fractured.
You must take your place in the circle of life.
And now we're dealing with what this is all about. Simba's meeting with his father is about taking responsibility. Simba, who has lived in denial for so long, suddenly faced with deep sorrow when seeing his father again. But his father basically telling him, I know you're hurting, but you have a responsibility. This is the legacy I gave you and you have squandered it on a nihilistic lifestyle. But no matter how much you're hurting, you have to put it away and fulfill your duty. Face your own darkness, take back the throne and help those who cannot help themselves. Which of course refers directly to Simba having to confront Scar, a character which arguably represents Simba's shadow in that Scar represents any man's natural desire to take power from his father, including Simba's desire to become king, something that we're introduced to relatively early in the story. So again, this is a scene that hurts anyone who could picture themselves in a situation where one is in sorrow over the loss of a loved one. Imagine that you suddenly get the chance to talk to them again and you just want emotional satisfaction. Maybe you want to tell them that you love them, maybe you want to ask your parents if they're proud of you, whatever. But instead that person reprimands you and tells you that you need to face your own darkness and take responsibility. This is not a pleasant scene. It was never meant to be pleasant, and Simba was never meant to gain any emotional satisfaction or closure from talking with his father. He was meant to be told the truth, and he was meant to be set straight.
How can I go back? I'm not who I used to be.
Remember who you are. You are my son, and the one true king. Remember who you are.
No! Please! Don't leave me!
Remember.
Father!
Remember.
Don't leave me.
So what we see here is that when Simba asks Mufasa for help, how can I go back? How can I do this? How can I take responsibility? Mufasa just tells him the same thing, but he adds, you are my son. As in, this is who you are. This is what I have given you. Whatever you're not comes from a lack of ability or bravery to integrate your own darkness. In other words, Mufasa cannot offer Simba any Deus Ex Machina, no magical tool to solve his problems. Instead, everything that Simba has to do comes from within himself. Now, how is this different from the live action remake? Let's first take a look at the scene.
Simba, you must take your place in the circle of life.
Well, first of all, we do see some of the same things. For instance, you must take your place in the circle of life. Again, we see some emphasis on having to return to whatever Simba has run away from. Fair enough. But the peak of the conversation, what is portrayed as sort of the breakthrough point?
As king, I was most proud of one thing. Having you as my son.
Please! Don't leave me again!
I never left you. And never will.
I'm proud of you, I never left you, I never will. So what we notice here is that even though these two conversations share some of the same characteristics and components, they are fundamentally different. While in the old version, there is no emotional fulfillment for Simba, only a confrontation with the failure to live up to responsibility, and a non-negotiable call to action by his father. In the remake, the point of the conversation instead becomes that Mufasa tells Simba how proud he is of him. And we know this is deliberate by Disney, as they have literally added this entire piece to the conversation. Which means that somebody sat down and instead of using the wording from the old version, decided to change the point of this conversation to basically being all about emotional closure for Simba, as he realizes that his father was always proud of him, which doesn't really make any sense. I mean, the whole point of the hero's journey is that the hero must become more than he is right now. And the whole point of Simba's journey is that he must go back, face Scar, reclaim the kingdom and essentially take control over his own self. The whole point is that there's nothing to be proud of, but there will be once Simba rises above himself and starts managing his own life and responsibility. But making the point of the conversation all about Simba's need for his father's approval simply deprives the story of its deeper meaning. It portrays it as if Simba needs emotional satisfaction before he can face his own darkness, as if he needs closure before he can face his past. But the point is the exact opposite. You only get closure when you face your past. The reason why Simba leads a life without meaning and purpose is because he has not yet faced his own darkness, and therefore not yet become an individual. In the old version, there is no compromise. When Simba cries out to his father, there's only one reply. Do what you need to do, rise above yourself, and you will find your salvation. In the new version, the message becomes, the primary importance is that of being vulnerable and seeking emotional satisfaction, and the hero must be emotionally bribed before he can face his dark past. The thing is, The Lion King is a brutal story. A child's father dies before his eyes, and unable to manage the guilt, the child hides away his shadow and falls into nihilism, until something from his past reminds him that there is a path greater than himself, and suddenly he faces a choice choice. Either live in the jungle of purposelessness for the rest of your days, or face the darkness that destroyed your father, and maybe if you succeed, you will once again get the chance to rule over everything that the light touches. By depriving the story of this component, by making the real problem all about Simba not knowing whether his father is proud of him, deprives any child or adult watching this film of that strong fundamental moral message. Simba rises to the task because he decides to rise above himself. To use the wording of Mufasa, when he decides to become more than he is now. And he steps in his father's footsteps not when he is made aware that his father is proud of him, but instead when he starts walking the path of responsibility and no longer needs his father's approval. So when teaching your children about responsibility, don't show them the new Lion King Disney live action remake crap. Show them the old version. Now this next one is really interesting, and it is also, in my opinion, directly tied to one of the greatest sicknesses of our time. Something which is also connected to the significant rise in anxiety and depression cases among young people. Namely the over-romantic and completely unrealistic portrayal of genius and talent. It's difficult to know exactly why this is the case, but people love watching movies about other people that are naturally gifted, almost as much as these companies love making these movies. And in recent time, the same goes for Disney. And sometimes this makes sense, especially when we as viewers are presented with an honest portrayal of genius. And of course there can be a lot of value in diving into the dark minds of John Nash and Alan Turing once you are an adult and have hopefully acquired a somewhat healthy relationship with your own self. But for a child, it turns out that an obsessive focus on the phenomenon of genius might not be such a good idea. Now there are several examples of this, but again, to get one clear and obvious example, we just have to look at the 2020 remake of Mulan. Now there is no person on earth who does not like the themes of the original Mulan movie from 1998. A young woman takes the place of her father to save his life, breaking tradition as China moves to fend off a Han invasion. I mean, what is there not to like? Themes of good and evil, sacrifice, responsibility, the integration of the feminine and masculine archetypes, and of course, probably the best thing about the Mulan movie, namely this. And I don't know about you, but I'm literally still hearing this song in my local gym once in a while. Just like before, let's compare some of the most important elements of the movie from 1998 and the remake from 2020. Just as with The Lion King, in the old version, we see the hero's journey clearly cut out. Being not only unsuccessful playing the traditional female role and also unsuccessful in bringing honor to her family, Mulan suddenly joins the army, and being a woman has a natural competitive disadvantage compared to the other men. In other words, in every aspect of her life, our main character is inadequate. An underdog. And of course, faced with adversity, she's almost sent home, but instead of accepting defeat, Mulan decides to rise above herself. Attempting to climb the pole to retrieve the arrow a last time, she confronts herself with her disadvantages and decides to work around them, basically using her brain instead. She succeeds, and as the scene continues, we see how she and all the other soldiers develop their skills through training. In other words, we see a clear overcoming of adversity by someone who frankly was not very likely to succeed in the first place. And one of the primary messages of the story is therefore that a situation can be changed through hard work. That if you put enough effort into what you're doing, you can actually become skillful, you can achieve your goals. All of which of course translates into your own self-worth is something that you define and something that you can create for yourself. And of course Mulan ends up defeating the movie's antagonist, bringing honor to her family. So what has changed with the remake? Well, to be honest, most has changed. The story is completely different except for a few components. But one of the most important aspects is the fact that Mulan is now some kind of magic kung fu prodigy who can run up walls and jump down rooftops and be all kung fu-like, even at a young age. In the story, it is explained as if she has a more powerful chi for some reason, which again is just another way of saying that she's born with some kind of gift that all of the other characters in the story are not born with. And to make it even worse, not only is she born with supernatural powers, but a primary part of the story is also that she needs to hide away her chi powers. Again, for no real reason other than the possibility to portray it as if a gifted prodigy is somehow at the same time a victim. And that also means that some of the adversity that Mulan meets in her life, she meets not because she needs practice, but because she's hiding away her true powers. And of course, once she decides to no longer hide her powers, she more or less automatically becomes better than anyone else. In other words, the hero's journey is more or less dead, and if you're not already born with supernatural powers, then too fucking bad. And despite the movie being somewhat entertaining to watch, this is a pretty toxic message. Because the more we show movies to children where the main characters are automatically, without any real effort, extremely extremely skillful at what they're doing, and the less we expose people to the honest truth that most people suck at most things, especially in the beginning, and in order to be really good at something, you need to train a lot and you need to do it for a lot of years, the more vulnerable our children are going to be once they go into the world thinking that they're going to find this one thing they're really talented at, just to realize that they're not prodigies, that no one will come out of the blue telling them that they are the chosen ones, and that they don't have any natural born gifts that will automatically set them apart from the rest. Instead, if we want our children to grow up to be healthy human beings, it's better to teach them that no one is born skillful. Even the most talented need to cultivate their talent through practice to actually turn it into skill. And think about it, in the old version of Mulan, the main character is a person who cannot do anything, nothing. She has no skill and she does not believe in herself. At the end of the story, she is skillful, she has fought for something greater than herself, she has integrated her shadow, faced her demons, accepted both her masculine and feminine sides, etc, etc. And she has of course acquired a higher sense of self-worth. Basically a true hero's journey, which has one fundamental message to anyone who's watching it. No matter who you are and what you can do right now, you can be something else in the future if you're prepared to put in the resources and sacrifice needed. And in the new version, instead the fundamental message is the main character deserves to be the main character because she is naturally gifted with skills that she did not put any real effort or sacrifice into acquiring. In other words, if you are not already a prodigy right now, you are not unique, you are not interesting, and you have no value. Try giving that message to a generation that is about to grow up with social media as their primary source of socialization, and let's see how many of these kids are seeing a psychologist regularly once they reach their teenage years. Now, in the beginning of this video, I said that this was not about the blue fairy in the remake of Pinocchio being black and for some reason bald. Now, getting to this third and final point, I have to admit that that wasn't entirely true. This point of criticism is not about a specific moral philosophy that is being promoted, and it's not tied to a specific movie. Instead, I want to reserve a couple of minutes to talk about a general trend which has come to characterize Disney in recent time. Namely the fact that the characters for some reason have grown to become more important than the stories. Something which can be seen in the way woke symbols or the presence of specific tokens seem to have become a primary component of modern day Disney movies. And by the way, I recently watched an excellent video by YouTuber Misha Petrov who talked about the increasing wokeness of Disney productions. So if you're more interested in this aspect, I highly recommend you watch her video. I'll put the link in the description. And don't get me wrong, it's not in itself the fact that the blue fairy is black or that the little mermaid is black or whatever. That's not the point. The problem arises when these things become primary compared to the story itself. When it becomes more important to push a woke political agenda than to create a story with deep underlying messages that actually help children grow up to be better human beings. When we start creating movies just for the sake of indoctrinating children to become good and loyal citizens to the LGBTQ rule, or for the sake of brainwashing our children to bow down to the radical feminist mob rule and mass hysteria. Now, in my opinion, one of the crucial things to understand about the many beautiful stories to be found in the earlier part of the Disney portfolio is that the characters in themselves don't really matter in any concrete manner. It doesn't really matter that Mulan is a woman, for instance. Just as little as it matters that the characters of the Lion King are lions. Because as mentioned earlier in this video, these characters are symbols, archetypes, and they are put there to make it easier for an individual to absorb a message. And this is why Jesus told stories when people asked him about stuff. Sometimes, if not always, it's difficult to understand moral philosophy just like that, and instead we weave it into beautiful or epic stories. And that is definitely something that we risk losing if we start regarding it as more important whether a character is black or white for that matter. And just to illustrate how obvious this is, let me ask you one question. Do you think The Lion King is about giving children a higher level of sympathy for the animal species of lions? No, of course not. Lions in this case are vessels, instruments through which a narrative and a bunch of messages can be presented to the crowd watching it. A way for children, and adults for that matter, to absorb messages through storytelling. The characters represent archetypes and symbols. They are the manifestation of the different forces, dark or light, that human beings have to deal with in the real world or within their own consciousness. Likewise, as I said earlier, it doesn't matter that Mulan is a woman. The story has nothing to do with feminism. It's about sacrificing yourself, taking responsibility, defending those who cannot defend themselves, fighting evil, integrating your masculine and feminine archetypes. When being confronted with adversity under military training, Mulan is, just as any other human being, man or woman, would be in her place, faced with the choice between running away or investing the amount of resources required to overcome that adversity. Again, we are dealing with a story consisting of universal themes and archetypes manifested in these characters. We risk losing the the opportunity to expose our children to valuable fundamental moral principles if we focus too much on pushing superficial political messages. If it becomes more important whether a movie takes place in Mexico or whether a character is black than what messages and moral philosophy the movie actually promotes, then the problem is that children, instead of being taught basic moral philosophy, instead of learning about good and evil, they are bombarded with what is essentially just aversive racism in a pathetic attempt to target racism among people at an early age. But the thing is, at least up until a certain age, children are not racists. They are not misogynists. The truth is, they barely comprehend these things. When children behave in an evil manner, it's because they're just plain evil. And don't get me wrong, if you have another skin color than the rest of your class, you will probably be teased or bullied with it. But to tell you the truth, children don't have the understanding or the level of abstraction to understand why there might be anything wrong with another skin color, another gender, or another sexuality. They just see someone who's different. And if you run into a bunch of bullies, what they want is to hurt you. And whatever makes you a little bit more different than the rest of the children, usually something you cannot do anything about, they'll find it and use it against you. If you have black skin, they'll use that. If you wear glasses, they'll use that. If you have a handicap, they'll use that. And if you're a girlish boy or a boyish girl, it doesn't matter. Children, and especially bullies, are animal-like, with their behavior largely driven by primitive impulses. And don't get me wrong, if you are discriminated based on race, the actions are still racist. But being bullied because you wear glasses or speak in a funny manner, if done seriously and over a long time, will leave you as emotionally shattered as being bullied for your skin color. And don't think that making the blue fairy in Pinocchio black will suddenly make these bullies stop and think, oh shit, I didn't think about that. It's actually okay to be black. Let me stop bullying this kid right now. I mean, do you think a generation of children reading or watching Harry Potter has stopped a generation of children wearing glasses from being bullied? Also, if there is something that a few decades of immigration into the Western world has taught us, it is that exposure does not equal tolerance or solidarity. Now, getting rid of racism or any other form of discrimination is not at all accomplished by feeding children with aversive racism, but by making sure that any individual grows up to believe in the existence of his fellow man. Not necessarily through exposure to different races, genders, or sexualities, but through exposure to themes of good and evil, self-sacrifice, honesty, strength, bravery, and the inclination to accept responsibility and rise above oneself. Now, to sum up this video, if we want to give children ideals to live up to, firstly, don't tell them that the ideal for happiness is other people's approval, not even their parents. And don't teach them that emotional satisfaction comes before responsibility. Likewise, if we want to give our children something to aspire for in a healthy manner, don't tell them that you need to be a naturally gifted prodigy to have value as a human being. Instead, tell them that no matter where they stand now, they can choose to work towards standing somewhere else tomorrow. And lastly, if you want to indoctrinate your children, indoctrinate them with fundamental values that will make them recognize the lives and liberty of their fellow human beings, making way for true tolerance for other people regardless of color, ethnicity, sexuality, or whatever other tribes people choose to divide themselves into. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. As I said earlier, remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and otherwise, I'll see you in my next video.